And you start to see an interesting phenomenon, and it is this idea of these amalgams of animals and humans. And it's throughout every culture you can imagine. So if you look at, go ahead. This happens to be hanging on my wall at home. So it was easy for me to take a picture of it. This is a winged lion, and this is from a very famous gate of an ancient Assyrian city. And it's called the Gate of Ishtar, and my brother sculpted this. He actually made a miniature of the entire gate, but this is a larger image of just one of the lions. So again, you see this amalgam of a creature. Why? Who knows? We don't know for sure. We know lions throughout history have been a representation of strength. Why it needs to have wings, goodness only knows. But there you go, and this is thousands and thousands of years old. Not this one, but this image. If you go, this is another one. This is, it's called the Lamassu. And this is a creature, as you can see, it has the head of a man, the wings of probably an eagle, and the body of a bull. And these were used, you've probably seen them if you have. The more standard image of them is they're very stiff with their wings at their sides, they're monumental, and they were on either side of all the entrances to, again, an ancient city in the Assyrian Empire, and they were also in other areas which they are now finding. And you know, the very sad thing that happened in Iraq was there was this Daglish, this group of very fundamentalist people who took over various cities in Iraq for a couple of years, and they destroyed a tremendous amount of ancient artwork. But they tunneled under the city of Mosul, which is built on an ancient Assyrian palace complex. And so when the people who headed the museums and all those people were able to come back, they actually discovered this series of tunnels, and they have found so much that is buried. They're opening up and finding these huge rooms. They found this throne room that is absolutely massive, and they're finding these winged bulls on the walls as decoration and so forth. So yeah, they blew up a lot of things, but they also did this weird thing with this tunneling, and that has now led to all these discoveries. So this concept of this Lamassu, again, is obviously associated with the leadership of these ancient Assyrian cities, and they're based on this, again, idea of the strength of the people who are running the country and what that imagery presents. Now, what he might have represented at that time, nobody really knows. But obviously, having something that is an amalgam of a man and an eagle and a bull is a rather bizarre image, right? Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Here's another one. This, if everybody knows this story, right?
The Minotaur?
The Minotaur, and Theseus is killing the Minotaur. And the Minotaur got the head of a bull and the body of a man. And now we're into Greek mythology. And again, why there is a story of why this Minotaur existed. But it's just that image of wanting to, put these bizarre things together and what they represent in ancient history.
I'm listening, so.
That's okay. This one you should recognize as well. I'm sorry for the picture. This is, yes, this is the head of Medusa, right? And it's on a shield. And who is this? This guy is at Versailles. This is Louis XIV, dressed up as Perseus with his big nose and his shield with the head of Medusa, who is a woman or female with all these snakes for hair. And she's one of these demigods, she and her sisters, who feature in these various Greek stories. And her gaze could turn you into stone, supposedly. So there's another one. Okay. So the idea of fantastical creatures, which is what you were just looking at, are these amalgams of human and animal combinations. And they have existed for a very, very long time. You can go back to ancient, they found on this ancient building in Iran. It's looks like a green man. Everybody know what a green man looks like? All the foliage coming out of the person's face.
Mm-hmm.
You'd swear that you should see that on a church in France or England, but it's on a piece of a building that's tens of thousands years old in Iraq, or I'm sorry, in Iran. So you've got this idea of these creatures that have existed, and I just for fun went on Wikipedia and just a list of hybrid creatures from all these different cultures. And this list is like, I don't know, 50, 60 different of these creatures, and it goes all the way from Anubis, who's the jackal-headed Egyptian god, Bastet, who's another Egyptian god who has the head of a cat, Sekhmet, who has the head of, right? And then you go to more obscure ones, and then this one also talks about the Minotaur, and then you've got just on and on it goes in every culture, in Japan, in India, tons of them. There's a very, very long list, and it's just kind of fun to see that this runs through cultures throughout the world. This is not unique to Europeans, it's not unique to Africans, it is a human characteristic that we seem to really enjoy, this kind of idea of the macabre, of putting things together that are this weird combination. And if you look, I couldn't get good images, but if you look at the illuminated manuscripts that were created in the 11th, 12th, 13th century, and Hearst had quite a collection of illuminated manuscripts. You'll see along the edges, and in that where they do that big first letter of the first word, all these really strange creatures, if you look really closely. Very weird stuff. And this is long before the Renaissance era. So this idea of creating these images and whatever they may have meant to the people at the time is something that seems to be innate in human culture. And I'd argue it's still going on. We're going to just go through a few that are the fantastical creatures at Hearst Castle. So anybody know where this fountain is?
Yeah, it's at A house.
Yeah. It happens to be the one with the frog, kissing the frog.
Yeah.
Tree below.
Yes. If you look at these creatures, these men, they're human all the way till kind of the knee, and then they end up with these curved, weird body parts, like mermen, maybe.
Yeah.
So there's a perfect example. This is a obviously modern or 20th century sculpture, but it's based on a one from the Renaissance era. Okay? There again, the mermen holding up Venus. Everybody knows where that is.
Yeah.
Or better. And then, anybody know where this is?
That's up on the bell tower, isn't
That's
it?
on the bell
Wow,
tower, yeah,
on the
both bell
tower.
towers. And
Yeah.
these are stylized green men.
Oh, wow, those are stylized green.
Mhm.
Cool.
So once you start looking for things at the castle, you'll find all over the place all this imagery. We didn't get a chance to take a picture of it, but they're green men in Mr. Hearst's bedroom in A house on the floor.
That's
You know?
what they are?
Yeah.
Those are green men.
I always wondered what they were.
Yep.
That's it. Oh, okay.
What's really fascinating is Mr. Hearst has all the green men in that, and his wife has none.
Yeah.
None of those protections from evil in her room at all.
I always think
None of those
as
tiles
his and
are
hers.
green men
She
in
has
that.
the hers and he has
Yeah,
the his.
yeah.
Which I just find it interesting.
And these images again, if you go back and you read about the history of green men, it's very murky. Let's just say. Some people, this person wrote a paper and said this, and then this person wrote a paper and said something completely different. You'll see them more in English churches. Well, you don't just see them in English churches, you see them all over the place when you start looking. So all anybody can say for sure, very ancient imagery, and they used to call them folate heads. I mean, that's the technical term that they use for them, not green men. But in England, green men became this phrase they used to describe these things. But they've been around for a very long time. And the idea is to say that we were going to talk also, and Monica's going to talk about the discovery of a palace in Rome that really jump-started the creation of what they came to call grotesques in the Renaissance time period, which is the time period that a lot of things from the castle are from. But I just wanted to bring up that there are creatures up there that have nothing to do with that grotesque as it is, you know, how should I say, academically described as having happened after this palace was discovered. The ideas of creating that kind of imagery have been with us for thousands and thousands of years.
Muna,
Yes.
do we have any idea about the origin of the mantelpiece on the 4th floor of the north wing in what I call Marian's bedroom?
Oh, in Marion's bed, you mean
Well,
in the
'cause
sitting
Ann
room?
Miller,
What?
because Ann Miller said that that's
Where
what
did
they
Ann
were
Miller-
On the 4th floor, oh, in the north
On
wing,
On the
I'm
north
sorry.
wing, on the north wing, so there's a
East tower.
green man
Uh-huh.
surrounded on either side by dragons that wrap around.
That one, the last I recall when I was
I have not
researching
been able
it,
to discover the
they
photo.
think that is actually modern
Oh,
fake.
how
It's got a big
disappointing.
crack to it,
Mm-hmm.
too, now.
Yeah. So, yeah, that is the latest information that I recall. I don't know if that's what's in the manual or not, but when
No,
we were
there's nothing
doing,
in the- there's
oh,
nothing
yeah,
about
when we were
the
doing the
photo.
research on it, the consensus was it's probably a fake.
Oh,
I know, it's kind of sad.
it's one of my favorites.
I thought I remember them saying it was probably English or
Yeah,
possibly.
yeah, that's what I thought, they
Because
said,
it
yeah.
has that kind of a breaking
Well,
motif
again,
on it with
it's
the dragon.
Possibly, maybe, but
Nobody knows.
nobody knows. It doesn't have any provenance. It doesn't have any information. And it looked, well, yeah, I'm not an expert, so I'm not gonna try to guess, but that was the consensus that we sort of came to. Or I should say not we, that the research at the time kind of came to, that it's possibly a fake.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So now we get into again, this, if you look carefully, these are snakes up here. But they're
Anyone
very
recognize where that is?
stylized, yeah, does anybody know
Choir
what this is?
stars in the.
Choir song,
assembly
right?
room?
In the
Assembly
assembly,
In the
yeah.
assembly room. And this harks directly to the discovery of that palace in Rome. And I think it's fascinating, and Monica's gonna talk about it. The term grotesque didn't mean ugly, weird critters
Hmm.
when it was first proposed. It is a word that essentially comes from the Latin for cave,
A grotto,
Grotto.
grotesque.
grotesque, grotto.
Grotesque.
And if you look it up in like the Oxford Dictionary or whatever, it'll say a French origin, but originally coming from Latin,
Yeah.
meaning cave or cave-like.
Mhm.
So it had nothing to do with when we say grotesque, most of us mean, ooh, it's, you know, it's ugly, it's weird. It had nothing to do with that. It had to do with where they thought they came from.
Yeah, but don't scary things come out of caves.
Well, you will discover that they weren't caves at all. Okay. So, and here again,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
Another one of these oddball creatures.
And
That
again, the choir
is,
stalls.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's in the refectory.
yeah,
No,
and that is
that's
a
the assembly room.
assembly room.
Oh, that is,
Yeah.
really?
That
There's some
is-
like that.
Head is the dolphin.
Yeah,
Oh, this is, okay, it's those,
this is
okay.
a grotesque. That's what it is. It's an image based on the images found in this palace that we're talking about.
Does that creature have a particular name or is it just a
Chimera.
fanciful?
Yeah, well,
What is
if
it?
you,
It's a
if you
chimera.
wanna call, yeah.
Chimera.
It seems like it is. It ends up with, you know, like vegetation and stuff, but with a woman's head like that on
On a
a,
bird is a.
On an
Yeah.
animal, any kind of
Yeah.
combo, they consider it a chimera today.
so, but the point is that we're looking at things in this case that are based on and would be correctly called grotesques. The stuff I showed you before, not.
Right.
But this and the one just before it that's on the choir stalls, those are truly grotesques. They are based on the imagery that came out of this palace. Okay? Where's that?
Mm.
A house lobby.
Yeah,
Right.
yep.
Right? This again is
Wow.
so evocative of imagery that came out of this palace. And this is a grotesque design.
Pretty cool.
Do you know, what was the name of that palace?
Oh, that's what Monica's going to talk to you
Oh,
about.
okay.
Oh, yeah.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not being purposely evasive.
Okay.
Okay, so I have a couple of things that I can talk about briefly that, where this terminology and how it's used and what are the origins. So, for example, we talked about the green men, and then, it'll say, like, this is from the Oxford Dictionary of English Folklore, that ultimately they have their origins in late Roman art. That's what one person says. And then another lecturer, his name is Ronald Hutton, and he was a professor at Gresham College. He says they come from India, and that they were brought possibly to, from India to Rome, and then from Rome everywhere else. But again, and he says they became a decoration for monks' manuscripts from which they spread to churches. So there's all these different opinions out there in the academic world, right? Mermaids and mermen, origins unclear. I love that. But they may date back to the first humans to explore the sea, which kind of makes sense. That's probably where they did come from. Earliest mermaid stories believed to have originated in the Middle East around 1000 BC. So ancient imagery. There's all kinds of mythology about them and what they did. Then there are the satyrs, satyrs. I can never say that word right. Satyrs. They are a male. Yeah, satyrs. Male nature spirit, right, with ears and tail, originally resembling a horse. If you look at old Greek mythology or imagery, they had the head of a horse, and they were supposed to be hideous looking, and they were really randy and rowdy, and were always trying to make it with all the women, and never very successful. And we have that, there's that one by the tennis courts where he's laying there, and the girls have come to steal his pipe away from him. So they become, during the Renaissance, much less hideous and much more goat-like. They end up with the lower legs of a goat and the horns of a goat, right? And they start calling them fawns rather than satyrs. So if you look at the sculpture in the gardens by Bee House, those are called fawns, but they have goat legs and little horns.
Cute little curly tails.
Yeah, and cute little, so they become very cute during the Renaissance. But originally in Greek mythology, they are ugly, rowdy, randy beasts. And then of course Sekhmet, she's the daughter of the sun god. And I put specifically in, and I can make copies of this if anybody wants it, but I wanted to give you, because it's a great story and I used to use it on tour, the story of her drinking all the blood-colored beer. Has anybody heard that story?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a story about Sekhmet that is a great story to tell if you happen to be able to stand by Sekhmet for more than a minute or two. And it's the version that I have here, and this is from a book that this woman wrote. Her name's Miriam Lekfen. It's a hard name to say. She's a Turkish-born American Israeli Egyptologist, so she covers the broad range of Middle Eastern, got everybody there. So she's the daughter of the sun god, one of the more important goddesses in the Egyptian pantheon. There's a myth at the end of Ra's rule on earth. He sends the goddess Hathor, and if you know Egyptian mythology, Hathor is like a cow goddess. She looks like a cow. But he sends her in the form of Sekhmet.
Who sends her?
Ra.
Her
Or
father.
Ray, or however they want to say it now. It's changing from when I learned all these names. They're changing the pronunciation. So they call him Ray a lot now. So I'm not sure.
I don't know.
Yeah. But anyway, in the myth, he sends her down to destroy mortals who conspired against him. She's very, she's the head of a lion, so she's a bloodthirsty goddess. Her bloodlust is not quenched at the end of the battle that she has with the people on earth, and this leads her to going on a bloody rampage that laid Egypt to waste and almost destroyed all humanity. It's kind of like the
Plague.
Flood or something.
the flood.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the flood story.
Noah
To stop her, Ra and the other gods devised a plan. They poured out a lake of beer dyed with red ochre so that it resembled blood. Mistaking the beer for blood, Sekhmet drank it all and became so drunk that she gave up on the slaughter and returned peacefully to Ra.
But it wasn't Sekhmet, it was Hathor, right?
Well, Hathor is, the thing about the Egyptian gods that are a little more complicated is they morph. They have more than one form.
Okay, so
So
Hathor is Sekhmet.
In this story, and this was on the tomb of one of the it was Ramses I can't remember which Ramses the second, was written on his tomb, and that's where they got this story from.
Okay.
So she is an incarnation of Hathor in this story. And I read another one where they said, oh well, the reason she ended up with the lion's head is he sent Hathor down to do this, and as she was coming down from wherever to Earth, she saw all the terrible things going on, and she got so enraged that by the time she got down to Earth, her head had turned into the head of a lion. That was another version of how she ended up looking like that.
I'm sorry, why did Ra want to destroy the mortals?
Because they were not obeying his command.
And it wasn't all of them, it was like some.
Yeah, it was a battle that was supposed to take place in this particular location, and then she got so carried away with herself that she just started raging on the rest of humanity, and the other gods were like, whoa, that's not what we had in mind. So those are just a couple of the backstories for some of these critters, and it's fascinating if you want to go down a rabbit hole and research this kind of stuff. It's amazing to me because it's so common to all the different cultures. So it's a common it's a commonality amongst human beings that we
Universal.
Yeah, we need to be able to explain these things that happen, and we find interesting ways of explaining them, and they usually involve animals in some form or fashion. Okay. And now we're on to Monica's section, and she'll tell you all about where grotesques actually arose from.
So Emperor Nero, in 64 AD, started to build a palace he called the Domus Aurea, or the Golden House. And you can see how big it was based on that yellow outline. They estimate it was 50 hectares or 125 acres. So imagine a building that's as big as the entire hilltop, the whole thing. And that red section, the little red there over the Esquiline, and if I mispronounce these, please correct me, because the Esquiline Hill there is what they have excavated so far. So they've only gotten this little bit. So he built this palace in 64 AD. It was never completed, and construction ended in 68 AD when he committed suicide. And most of his descendants were so horrified by the amount of money that he had poured into this huge palace that, by the way, was not intended to ever be lived in. It was solely for parties and public events. They estimate there were going to be 300 rooms. We're talking gold, jewels, marble, ivory. And by 74 AD, after he had committed suicide, it had been stripped of all those precious metals and precious things. And because they were so horrified about it, they started to build over it. And so the Baths of Titus, who was one of the emperors, were built over a portion of it in 79 AD. The Colosseum was built over the artificial lake that he had in the middle of his palace, which is how the Colosseum was able to raise the water so they could have naval battles and then drop the levels back down, was because Nero had put in that artificial lake. The Baths of Trajan, I don't know how to pronounce it, Trajan, were built over part of it in 109 AD, and then the largest temple to Venus in Rome by Emperor Hadrian finally finished it off pretty much in between 121 and 141 CE. And at this point, it is completely buried. It is overbuilt by many, many, many different structures. Yeah, it's pretty cool. So, in my research, I found that there were two basic stories. The first story was that Renaissance architects or historians were doing an excavation in that area and ended up dropping into what they thought was a cave or a grotto. I prefer the legend. The legend is that a young boy was traipsing around in the 7 hills of Rome, and he fell through a crack in the Esquiline Hill, which is one of those 7 hills. And he found himself in what he thought was a huge cave. Now, imagine it's buried under hundreds of feet of earth. We're 1,300 years after Hadrian had built that temple. So it's been lying there in airless conditions with no humidity for 1,300 years. And when they toss a torch down to him so that he can see what he's doing and they could try and rescue him, he discovers that all of the walls surrounding him are covered in pictures. And this picture here, that is one of the figures. It actually comes from a room called the Chamber of the Sphinx. And this is what the room still looks like. It's unexcavated at this point, and you can see right there that that's where they got that figure from. And when the news, this is the Hall of Achilles, when the news went around that he had discovered, and imagine the revelation this is to Renaissance artists who have never, ever, ever seen what a Roman decoration actually looked like. All they've got are marble statues where most of the pigment is worn off, much like our, the Muses, right? And where the only pigment left is on the side where the red pigment is in her eyelashes. And all of that was brightly colored and had semi-precious and precious jewels in it before. So imagine that you are a young artist and you're coming down into these halls with torches and that, and all of a sudden you're seeing what Roman art actually looked like. And here we start with those fantastical creatures. This is a fresco from the ceiling. They have started excavating, as I said. Not only have they found 100 rooms, but they have found dining rooms, multiple dining rooms. They have found a covered walkway, and I didn't write the name down because I couldn't pronounce it if I tried. 2 large courtyards, and they estimate that that's only that small portion, that they still don't know where the actual boundaries of this place are. But they had artists, here's a room that they're working on. But I just think of, I mean, this is the room of the golden vaults is what this is called. But look at the size of these things.
And they built over these things?
They built over these things.
They just with rubble.
Well, they did, yeah.
They filled it with rubble.
They
and
filled
then
it with
built
rubble,
Oh,
yeah,
okay,
and then they
okay.
built over it.
So Monica, if you go to Rome now and you go to the Domus Aurea, you can buy tickets, and now they even have VR glasses.
Yeah,
Where you
Oh,
can
cool.
go and you can not only see that,
yeah.
but then you can see
And I
it
wanted to put
reproduced
in-
as it would have
Well,
been.
they think, because there's like 15 different versions of how they think some of these rooms
Yeah.
look.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel that I should just pick one and say this is what it looked like. So I just left it in how they found it versus what they think it might have done, because there's a lot.
Monica?
If
Yeah.
anybody wants to speak to Kay Brindleson, she was in Rome in September, and she did the VR.
Oh, I bet. I would love to go back.
I'm
So
just
is
curious,
this-
are these guys standing on the ground looking up?
Yes,
And if
looking
so,
up.
So how high are we talking?
I don't know. It doesn't tell you.
So
About
when
30
you-
feet?
When you
I would say
say,
it's pretty high up.
when
How
you
high?
say-
You're in the room.
She said a few stories.
Stories,
Yeah,
like
it's
2, 3, 4 stories up.
Monica?
Hmm.
When you say the golden room, does that mean it's covered with gold leaf or something? Or-
They don't
They
know,
don't
because
know.
remember, all of that was removed
Oh,
before.
precious.
So why are they calling it golden
Domus-
room?
'cause
They
that's
call
an
it just the,
Domus Aurea is the
Yeah.
golden house.
Oh, okay.
this is room 42. These are some of the fantastical creatures.
Mm-hmm.
And when Monica was saying it laid there, essentially hermetically sealed, it
For
was,
1,300
yeah,
years.
it must have been amazing, but by the time you're looking at it now, it was, even then, it started to deteriorate right away because of all the humidity and.
Right.
And now the air is,
So,
yeah.
What it looked like then must have been
Oh, wow.
astonishing.
So you see these holes here, and they would attach a big plank of wood to the end of a rope, and you would sit on that plank of wood, and they would lower you through these holes.
Oh, my goodness.
So you can only imagine what was destroyed as they are digging the holes so that you can get down in there. That's also part of that Hall of the Golden Vaults. And then this is a quote from an anonymous artist that was done in 1496. He said, "In every season the rooms are full of painters. Here summer seems cooler than winter. We crawl along the ground on our stomachs, armed with bread and ham, fruits and wine, looking more bizarre than the grotesques." And here we have some more figures. I can picture it, can't you? The dangers these guys are going to go through just so that they can see. Michelangelo, Leonardo were visitors down there. Raphael, who wrote a compendium about all the grotesques that he found in there, and was one of the founding members of. And I was going to talk about mannerism, but it's hard to find out whether it's an actual school or whether it's just considered part of it. Because I found like 15 different.
It's just a term.
It's just a what?
A term.
Oh, it's just a term, so it's not an actual like impressionism or.
They're all just terms, but Impressionism was specifically used for one specific exhibition,
Mm-hmm.
the anniversary of which is being celebrated this year.
Yeah.
But mannerism is an art historical term.
Oh,
It's
okay.
just-
So it's not like a school.
No,
Oh, okay.
Well,
not really.
there's a lot of debate, let's just say.
Well, that's what I
because-
found. That's
yeah,
why.
There's a lot of debate.
I kind of steered away from it because there's so much different information about it that I didn't feel like I'm not an
If you're
expert.
talking about something called the Mannerist School of Painters.
Yeah.
That's not really
Yeah,
a normal artist, a professional art historical concept.
right.
The style is Mannerist, the movement is Mannerism, it's not a school as we know it.
Oh, okay. But this is actually a copy of a drawing that Michelangelo did of some of the grotesques he found on the walls of the Golden House. And these were done by Leonardo. But they've also, a lot of the artists put their autographs down on the walls.
Like I said,
Here's Raphael's assistant, Giovanni da Udine, and again, I don't,
Udine.
Udine?
It's Udine.
Oh,
from
see,
where he
doesn't
came.
he say, isn't
He
it,
was
looks like an
from-
E?
yeah,
E-N-E.
That's how,
Oh.
that's his graffito,
Oh,
but
that's just.
his,
okay.
it's sort of his nickname, because he came from Udine.
Oh, I'm sorry then, it's
That's
misspelled.
it. Don't worry.
But that's his assistant. That is his autograph. So they defaced a lot of it also by putting their graffiti. Yes, ain't that the truth? Boys will be boys. And Raphael was so entranced with what he saw in that golden house that he, as I said, wrote a compendium. And he decorated Cardinal there we go. Bibbiena? Okay. I know. I don't speak Italian.
Yes,
And
she did.
as you can see, it's almost exactly what he would have found in the rooms there, the golden house. Matter of fact, a Roman architect by the name of Vitruvius, back in 30 BCE, said that that style was ornamental arrangements of arabesques with interlaced garlands and small and fantastic human and animal figures. So this had been going on for a long, long time, this kind of decoration. And not only was Raphael influenced by it here, this is the Logetta in the Papal Palace in the Vatican. The artist is actually da Udine. Udine? Okay. Italian is not?
It's okay.
Okay.
It's like Hawaiian, sail.
Giovanni da Udine was a
Okay.
specialist in that kind of decoration.
Was he? Okay. Doing it
And he
under
did all of
Raphael's
the
direction.
animals
Here's
and-
the Palazzo Vecchio in Florence. And again, you've got all those fantastical creatures. And things are going swimmingly for grotesques. Except for people were kind of offended. Some of the early Christians were becoming offended. Giorgio Vasari, who was the minister of culture for the Medici court in Florence, said in 1550, and I quote, "Grotesques are a type of extremely licentious and absurd painting done by the ancients, and the bizarrer the painter's imagination, the higher he was rated," unquote. And so a lot of people look down on that form, and because of the Protestant Reformation and all of the challenges that they were doing to a lot of the Catholic Church, to their, oh my goodness, what's that word? I don't know.
What do you think?
Their processes of the Catholic Church.
Oh,
and
the
the-
practices, you mean?
Yeah, the practices. Don't they have a special word?
Indulgences.
That's
Well,
it,
that's
the
one of them.
indulgences and the transubstantiation and all the other things that the Catholic Church did. Pope Paul II convened a synod of Catholic churches in Trento, Italy. He started it in 1545. And they discussed all the differences between the Protestants and making reforms so that the Protestants couldn't attack them quite as often. A lot of the iconoclasts, I don't know if you've heard that word before, they were early Christians who were destroying art, destroying any kind of statuary or painting.
They were, let's say, doctrinaire Protestants. Early Christians are third century.
Well, they were also, weren't they destroying Roman and Greek statuary back in the early days also?
But they used their, well, it was more the so-called barbarians. who
Oh,
were-
okay, okay.
The interesting thing about this date is that in around 1585, Pope Gregory XIII had his part of the Vatican painted in the style of Raphael's loggia, which was right downstairs.
Yeah,
And the public never sees it.
so
and it
therefore no one
doesn't
can
get-
complain.
It doesn't, well, in those days, whoever was in that part of the building could see it, but nowadays, it doesn't get much attention because it belongs to the Secretary of State of the Vatican, so it's off limits. But it's, the whole concept, it's the third floor and Raphael's loggia is the second floor, it's just
Right.
upstairs. So he was, in 1585, he was commissioning artists to continue what Raphael had done, what the predecessors had done.
Okay, thank you.
That's
You
like
can tell I'm not an expert in this.
I'm
Well,
glad
that's-
you did all the work.
It's very common, you know.
So the Council of Trent didn't actually, even though it started in 1545, didn't actually take up the idea of images until their very last session in 1563. What's amazing to me is that there was an artist named Paolo Veronese, who, let me get to that picture. This was Paolo Veronese.
Good enough.
Okay. This was his Last Supper. This to him was the Last Supper. And one of his critics said, and I quote, "Do you think it is appropriate that the Last Supper of our Lord includes jesters, drunks, Germans, people of short stature, and the like?" I love the Germans. I don't understand why they were against Germans back then, but that was his quote. Barbarians. And so they actually made him change the name of that to Feast in the House of Levi. It was no longer allowed to be called the Last Supper. The Council of Trent said that images were no longer supposed to encourage lasciviousness. They weren't supposed to be showing lots of nude flesh anymore. They were supposed to be decorous, educational, and clear. There was no more amorphic putting people and animals stuck together. And so it subtly changes. It becomes, the paintings of that, after that, it's much more Mary, Joseph, angels. It's clearer.
Monica?
Yes.
Was this painting altered in some way? I know they changed the name, but I'm looking at it.
I did crop it because it was too
just
big.
they added, because I'm not picking up the Last Supper. I see bits of it. But
Well, there's
overall-
Jesus right
Well, no, I
here.
get that, but I mean, it looks more than just the Last Supper.
Well, it is his interpretation
Okay.
of the Last Supper.
Yeah,
You know, keep in mind that in his day, he's a modern, of that day artist, and obviously he's not interested in painting a very old-fashioned, in his mind, scene of the Last Supper. He's more interested in making contemporaneous to his time.
Got it, thank you, because it looks like it was,
Yeah,
the green
and that's
figure.
why, I think that's why the critic is saying, wait a minute,
How do you
this
have
is the
Germans
Last
in
Supper.
there?
The figure in green is larger than Christ at the table, that's what those mean.
I know, but I mean, it's just like people, I mean, who is that guy that was so outraged, Robert Mapplethorpe?
Oh,
That
surprise.
outraged people by using religious and putting them in very,
Suggestive.
not religious, yeah. So, I mean, artists have been outraging people for millennia, I think, and this was just the latest. Now, to kind of end my,
I like that they made him change it to a name that makes no sense.
Well, yeah.
Dinner in the House of
I'm
Levi with the Germans. and the
fascinated by
church.
little tidbits, and Michelangelo died in 64. Yeah, the next year after he died, which is when they had that final session of the Council of Trent with the images, after he died, they went on to the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel and they painted loincloths
It was at the
on
end.
the naked,
It was not the ceiling, it was the end fresco.
just the end fresco?
Yes,
Okay.
the last judgment.
But they painted loincloths because they didn't appreciate that Christ didn't have a beard, and they didn't appreciate that they were very muscular and nude. So, yeah, I just find the timing of that very interesting. But you know more than I do.
That was part of it.
That was part of it? Okay. So these are some of the grotesques at Hearst Castle. Again, you guys know this, right?
Which one?
The choir stalls in the assembly room,
And that's
in between,
in morning room, right?
and that is, it's behind you. When you come through the morning room to the
Yeah.
billiards room, it's behind
Behind
you.
yeah. They always look like the winged monkeys in
They
Wizard of
do,
Oz.
but if you
I
really
don't
get
know,
up
I always think
close-
that when I see them.
If you really get up close, there's a lot of those grotesques. And I tried to find a better picture, but I found a Raphael sketch that if you put it up next to those assembly room, you wouldn't have been able to tell which was Raphael and which was
In the frieze, you mean?
Yeah,
So anyways,
yeah, the frieze,
those
because
paintings-
they're so similar.
Those those two friezes are really interesting, and their date at one point was debated. Nobody could believe that they were that good in the 16th century.
Yeah.
But the consensus seems to be that at least one of them is. And one of them, I think the one in A House, came from a dealer in Santa Barbara, and the whole question was how on earth did that happen?
Yeah. But no,
That's
I'm not
definitely
actually, I'm talking about, he did a panel that
You're
looks
talking
like
about
the
the backs
backs
of the
of
choir
those
stalls.
choir stalls. But I couldn't, it was such a small picture, when I tried to blow it up, it got way too fuzzy. So it's a sketch that he did that
That virtually looks
virtually looks like the back of those choir stalls in the assembly room.
They might have been using the same models.
They might have been, yeah. It was just kind of interesting.
Well, obviously, the designs from that, the Domus Aurea became really a guiding principle for a lot of artists for that
And
kind
the
of decorative
Renaissance.
work.
And
Oh, I
those,
love those.
Oh.
the ones that you
Ugh,
just,
no, thank
that
No,
you
me
just
too.
showed, that was
No,
French,
thank you.
and it was authentic French, right?
Which one?
Those, that one on the right, that was not, like, did they mold those and make copies, or are all the ones that we have,
I don't
do you know,
remember.
original?
I think that's original French. I think, because one of those doors is original and one of them is not, correct? Yeah,
Somebody asked me
That's
about that
right.
just the other day. When we were going through that doorway, and they asked me that.
yeah,
So you think
but it's
that's-
behind you,
Yes,
yeah.
and they think that's original French?
Yeah, I think so. And you guys know these guys.
Yeah.
I love those.
No, nothing.
I don't know the one on the right, where's that?
That
That's
Oh.
above the, it's in
It's
the
the refectory, yeah, it's above the door that we come in.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating is he's wearing a shirt and coat and he has human feet. But whatever that heck is of a head,
It's right there. And
or a
they're,
golem,
you know,
right?
and they're here and here, and there's one side has a man's head, face, and then there's one that's this.
And then of course there's some more from that frieze. And then these are older grotesques. That's in that,
Yeah, that's
in the
Romanesque.
celestial
Yeah,
ceiling, those,
yeah.
those faces, those are,
So technically, you wouldn't call those grotesque because they're older than the discovery of the Domus
well,
Aurea.
that's true, but they're part of, and I won't make you say the word,
Yes.
they're part of that apotropaic magic, where you find, have you seen the daisy wheel on that Spanish table in the Celestial
Yes.
Street?
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
part of apotropaic magic. It was intended to keep evil spirits from coming in to your home.
I
No?
always thought that was a stylized lion.
Did you? Well, it could be, but it definitely looks like some of the stuff that I found from, that
Is that
era.
we say it's from
That's the
Normandy?
Mansions from France.
No, it's from France, right? It's northern France, right?
I don't remember.
I've never
French,
heard, yeah,
probably
just French,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Romanesque.
Have you, do you know, Mary, that, the fireplace?
There were a lot of questions about the mantelpiece around because of the weirdness of the inscription.
Ah.
Because of the
But I don't-
inscription?
But I don't remember what the century or the origin is.
It was 11, I'm pretty sure it's a 12th century.
Mhm.
It's the
Yeah,
oldest-
no, no,
Oldest
it's a
mantelpiece
century,
we
but-
have.
It looked, I think, don't pay no attention to me right now.
Well,
So
of course I'm gonna pay
I thought
attention to
was-
Well,
you.
it could be 11th century, I don't have.
Oh,
the
okay.
manual.
But it is around the time when they were very, very superstitious. It's when hunky punks come into play in England. They're those, like that guy was very close to a hunky punk,
What's a hunky punky?
this guy.
Hmm.
It was basically English churches.
Now I will take a moment to interject. There's a difference between what people were imagining deities and divinities looked like, if they could not see them. That was your Assyrian, or the symbolism related to religions. In India, you might have a deity with the head of an elephant. They're different from imaginary creatures that have nothing to do with the religion.
Right.
And in the Old Testament, the distinction already with early symbolism is very clear, where God refers to religions of the East and their abominations, meaning that the creatures that were invented to be the imagery of those religions were considered by the writers of the scripture to be against nature, let's say. And the distinction is very clearly drawn in the Old Testament because it says God created man in his own image, which is why you frequently see God the Father represented as a human being. And it is in distinction to Eastern religions that had other images of their deities who they could never see. So this kind of medieval imagery is very different from what would be considered religious imagery.
Right. I'm sorry I didn't make that more clear.
That's okay. The business, well. Okay.
Basically, what these guys were supposed, I found many different
Oh,
reasons
yes,
for
sorry.
these. These
One
were
other
supposed
thing.
to be,
I forgot, one
Okay.
other thing. Just remember, Greek myths and Roman myths, that is religious.
Yeah.
To them,
It's
those were the religions.
right.
Yeah.
And if they had satyrs painted on Greek vases, and they looked randy, as you said, with goats, with a high libido, it was because they were associated with Bacchus and fine living and drunkenness, and so they had a kind of religious association. But it's useful to remember that what we call myths were religions,
Right.
Right.
just
And-
like in Egypt.
Yeah.
And now
But
we-
we found that it was very different. A lot of times these were supposed to be a physical manifestation of what would happen to you if you strayed from the path moving towards God. Some people claim that the hunky punks were there to watch you, to make sure that you weren't sinning. That they had the magical ability from sitting on top of that doorway of that church to see every person in that town, and if you were sinning, they were going to see it and they were going to report it somehow. They are also, as I said, it's called apotropaic magic, which was there supposedly to keep evil from coming into the church or into your building or into your home. Which is why you find the daisy wheels on things like doorways and tables and mantles and that, was to protect you from that evil eye or that evil that was going to come into the house. And it's hard to tell, except for by the age, of whether it's considered an apotropaic or whether it's more along the lines of that Renaissance. It's just cool looking, so let's put it on a wall, right? But yeah.
You
Everybody
know
got
that-
And then I'm gonna pass it back to Muna, who's gonna talk about Violet le Duc. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Is it the one on this side where where is that in that previous?
What, the
Well,
little,
it's
Oh,
it's
you want
on
me to go back?
the mantle that I always thought, they said they added to that to make it big enough to hold the tiles, and I always thought the faces were the part that was added. But it making it seem like maybe they weren't. They look cleaner than the rest
It
of
never
it.
said, I
Well, this
mean, that
happens
they
to
don't
be-
look clean
yeah,
to me.
this happens to be one of the ones that is in better shape. Some of them look really bad.
Yeah,
They're broken and,
there was
so
nothing in the
many
manual that
questions,
said that
like
part of that
Mary
was
said,
fake.
there's so many questions about this
We don't know
mantle.
what they are.
But it's, it's obviously put together from different parts and pieces.
Well, the
and-
tiles, right, are
Yeah.
not part of it. Nobody knows where the columns came from.
And so it's one of those problematic pieces at the hilltop.
Any other questions about
I
it?
just have a quick question. Under the umbrella of grotesque, you've mentioned hunky punks and gargoyles. Do all of these images fit into specific categories, or they're all just?
We're gonna
by-
talk about that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the main reason I wanted to bring him up is because he is someone that Hearst really admired. And he was an architect, obviously, in France, and this was his lifespan, so all the way to almost the latter part of the 19th century. But his influence went far beyond that, and there are a number of more modern day architects that talk about being influenced by him, or designers, like Richard Morris and a whole slew of them. So he's very influential, especially in France, but throughout Europe, and his influence comes to the United States as well. And he is, one of the things he talks about is the importance of maintaining your national or your own style. Neoclassicism, very popular, right? He says, okay, that's Italy's thing. But French has Gothic style, and we should appreciate that, and we should maintain that, and we maybe even should bring it into more modern architecture. So there's neoclassical, there's also neo-Gothic, and they call a lot of different things, but neo-Gothic is one of the terms. Hearst, there's a letter that I think you finally found the quote, where he's talking about all the changes that he wants to make, and then he signs his name to Julia Morgan, as though he's and so obviously he's somebody that Hearst knows about and is probably influenced by, although the Hilltop is by no means got an overwhelming vibe of, Gothic necessarily. But I wanted to talk to him for that reason, because he does come into the story with Hearst, and he's obviously influences Hearst in various ways, and influences a lot of other architects, frankly. There's a whole host of architects that look to him, and especially because he publishes a tremendous amount of written material, of imagery. He's a very good painter, very, very good artist. And he ends up creating this dictionary of Gothic imagery that it gets used a lot by architects even into the 20th century. So he's very influential in this field, and he happens to be the one who did a lot of the renovations on many of the very iconic French buildings, particularly Notre Dame, Saint Denis. He did a lot of them, and so there was this. I've heard a lot of times people talk about him in a disparaging way, because he just wanted to make everything Gothic, and he just put Gothic this, that, and the other on just stuck it everywhere, and even when it didn't belong. And when you read about him, he actually didn't do that. He was very careful. And I wanted to talk about the difference between all these different things we've been talking about: fantastical creatures, we haven't really talked about gargoyles, grotesques, and then gargoyles. Because a lot of times people would ask you, especially in front of the house, they'd go, "Are those gargoyles up there on the house?" We don't have, Hearst Castle doesn't have any gargoyles. Gargoyles were an architectural feature designed to push water away from the walls of the buildings that they were on.
Yeah.
So they always have a big open mouth.
They're drain pipes.
Yeah, they're drain pipes, basically.
Fancy.
Very fancy drain pipes. So they'll always be jutting out like that, because they're trying to push the water away from the walls. And you can see this big open mouth, and they are part of, they're gutters, basically. They're gutters on these churches. And so what had happened to Notre Dame, and a lot of the historic buildings in France, was the Revolution, the French Revolution, which did a number on the Catholic Church, and other revolutions that happened after that, and just general lack of maintenance, we shall say. So apparently the last gargoyles and grotesques, because there are grotesques on Notre Dame as well, were either removed or broken off, or no one really knows, in the 1800s. So when he comes to redo the church in the latter part of the 1800s, he puts them back. And he's seen images of them, he's seen paintings of the church from way back when. So he tries very hard to recreate what he thought was on the building. Now the spire that he put on, he did modify, because there was that big spire that burned. There was a spire, but it was much smaller. And he decided to make it bigger because he didn't think it was proportional, and he wanted to make sure that it would not be toppled over by bad weather or whatever. So the spire is a little different from the original one. But he put back all the gargoyles and grotesques on Notre Dame, and he got roasted for it. Because there weren't any on it for so long, people just assumed there never were any on it. When I say people, I'm talking about, the general public, the art historians, whoever was. So anyway, so that's why they're there. They were originally on the building, and they were put back by him. And so you see the difference now. Okay, fantastical creatures, these are all fantastical creatures, right? But after the discovery of the Domus Aurea and the influence that had on the artists of the Renaissance, those creatures that they are what we call grotesques. That term means from the grottos, from the caves that they thought those rooms were. So those are grotesques. Grotesques are not gargoyles. They have no architectural or structural function. They're just decorative, strange looking, probably, creations, especially in sculpture. And then a gargoyle, this is another one. It's hard to say because of the way it's done. It looks to me like it's not actually a functional drain pipe or anything. It looks more like a grotesque, but the next image, that's a grotesque. That is it looks so much like, this kills me, it looks so much like the flying monkeys from, doesn't
I'm
it?
telling you right now.
I mean, I think somebody saw this, went to France and saw this, and because it looks so much like those flying monkeys, but it's got wings, it's got this weird little, I don't know what on its head.
But no drainage.
No, this is a grotesque.
Yeah, it's not a gargoyle.
So when people talk about gargoyles at Hearst Castle, there aren't any.
There's a single one.
There are only fantastical creatures and grotesques. No gargoyles.
The castle could use some gargoyles.
It could. It really
We have
could.
those proper downstairs.
Yes. And he's the end of our presentation, this little fellow, he or she. So
ends the lecture.
Yeah, so any questions or comments or?
Were the gargoyles, why did they make them ugly though? Were they to scare off evil, or?
That's a good question. They
You
weren't
know?
all animal creatures. Some are human.
Well, right, but I
Human
mean, they're
figures.
scary. I mean, I walked on that roof, so,
Yeah.
I mean, they're
If
like,
you've ever been on my Facebook page, some of the stuff that woodcarvers put on to churches, there's one guy who carved a wooden man who is helping himself down in that
Pleasuring
area,
himself.
parading himself, and it's on a church building. So sometimes I think they're just being funny, do you know what I mean, or whimsical, or.
I don't know, but, I
Who
mean,
knows?
cause,
So Monica, I know that this is a grotesque, not a hunky punk. What exactly is a hunky punk as a grotesque? What is specific to a hunky
Yeah,
punk?
what's
Well,
the difference?
Well,
Okay.
it's generally
Well, it might
thinking
be.
from that.
Again, a grotesque is an image that is based on the imagery seen in the Domus Aurea.
Okay.
So they are specifically copying those strange looking creatures or those weird men's and women's faces. The very, if you look at, that fresco in A House,
Mhm.
the thin, like vegetative looking, whatever that is, if it's a garland or,
Yeah.
that all is grotesque. A hunky punk is a whole nother thing.
It's just.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought it was under the umbrella of a grotesque.
No,
No.
no,
Oh, so that's my
those are
confusion.
much,
Thank you.
they've been around much longer. They
Oh.
are a fantastical creature, basically.
Thank you.
Whether that, as Mary was saying, some of these things are religious and some
Are not.
are magical or possibly
I thought they were
pagan
all
in
under the same
origin.
umbrella. Thank you.
Who knows?
So you're not gonna use grotesque with a capital G referring to the Oreo, Domino, whatever,
Domus
I don't
Aurea?
know, whatever,
Domus Aurea?
Domus Aurea?
Not going to refer to grotesque with a capital.
It's like there is the grotesque that come from there, but then there's other crazy creatures that you're saying we can't call
Well, if-
grotesque.
Again,
I think
again,
that if it's a
grotesque-
mix-
Small g? we
Well,
call
no,
it
because
No.
grotesque is
Mary's
referring-
biting her tongue.
Oh, go ahead, Mary.
She knows a better answer.
I think when you're giving a tour, you don't need to worry about making these distinctions or what word to use.
Yeah,
Unless you're
what,
talking about the frieze, for example, that almost explicitly refers to the Domus Aurea. But
Okay.
for visitors,
They don't
Yeah.
care.
no, what I was
There's
trying
so much
to
more.
impart to you guys is where this terminology comes from and what it means. If you're gonna call whatever ugly, weird looking critter you see on the castle a grotesque, that's your business, as long as you understand the terminology isn't just blanketly applied. It is specifically referring to the imagery that came out of the Domus Aurea. It's not referring to anything else.
Like the
You
Congress
know-
dolls.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
You know, what I find so creepy and scary are all these angels that are like right above your bed. in
Oh,
the-
yeah, the cherub.
Now, where does that, does that have?
That's a
relate to
whole
any
nother
other-
That's
story.
religious. That's the
That's-
ceiling of a charter house, isn't it,
Yeah.
of a cathedral. It was based on the ceiling of a charter house. Those are supposed to be cherubs. I
thought they're
call it the
seraphim.
scary doll head ceiling,
Yes,
is
I
what
do
I call
too.
it. Cause I wouldn't wanna wake
Yeah,
up
that's
with
a
those
whole,
things
that's
looking down on
going
me.
into the iconography of the Catholic Church and talking about the
Yeah.
different types of angels or angelic creatures. There's seraphim, cherubim.
They ate wings,
You know.
cherubs.
Well, following on with that angel thing, you notice on the two cottages on either end, you've got those cherubs underneath the eaves, and some of them are sticking their tongues out.
Right.
Is that also an attempt, I mean, a stylized
I think it's just
warding off of
there.
people's
I think
spirits,
it's
or is
just
it just
somebody
being
No,
funny?
that's
They're
modern
Cupids,
day
right?
guy creating something in
Is that
concrete,
Cupid?
basically.
Sticking their tongue
Yeah,
out?
they're sticking their tongues out.
Oh, okay. Could be, I love how you said
Yeah,
that.
because again, those were created by the craftsmen at the castle.
No, but were they trying to reproduce something that was?
We don't
Who knows?
Okay.
Be careful with that, because there's all kinds of stories about the sticking out tongue thing. I won't tell you them because they'll become a guide to the.
So are you
again.
saying that we
Yeah.
don't think Julia Morgan designed those?
Yes, you did.
You're never gonna know the answer for everything,
Interesting.
because he
No.
didn't write it all down,
But I would
sadly.
like to know.
Well.
Most of those key things came out of Julia Morgan's office,
Okay.
out of like Thaddeus Joy, her designers. They mostly, but then some of the craftsmen also created their own designs.
Okay.
So, we'll never know, because like she said, a lot of this stuff was never documented or recorded.
A lot of our visitors are fascinated by the animals in the teakwood cornice. And it's my understanding that those came out of Jules Supo's head.
Mhm.
So, when you look at those, do you relate them to this history and?
Well,
or any of
certainly
that?
anything that is
kind of
a
thing
strange amalgam of
Kinda
a
like a,
human
yeah,
or
sort of
a
a animal.
combination of
Griffin
animals.
More
or,
than one
you know.
kind of animal.
Yeah,
or
those are
thing.
fantastic creatures, and that was my point with starting with those to begin with, because those are the common thread that goes through all of this.
Yeah.
This idea of creating these fantastical images.
Huh.
So if you want a hierarchy, fantastical creatures covers it all. And then grotesques come about because of the Domus Aurea discovery during the Renaissance. And gargoyles are much older than grotesques. They're more medieval, and they are, again, architectural elements that help keep water away from buildings. And they're very French. I mean, you begin to see them on other Gothic era buildings, but they're, as he said, as Leduc said, it's keeping that French architecture, not letting neoclassical or Italian pollute all of France's architecture. Let's keep our own here. And of course, it comes to England and it comes to America too. We have neo-Gothic in America. They have neo-Gothic.
So does France have most then, or the biggest collection of, or rather, the largest amount of?
Oh, I couldn't say. I'm just saying that he wanted to maintain that French Gothic style, because he said, it originated with us. It's our national style, so we should celebrate it. And through that, it comes to Victorian England. You see a lot of neo-Gothic, and then you see also it in the United States.
And then Victor Hugo took
Yes.
Quasimodo.
Yes, and wrote that story, and
With the gargoyle.
Yes.
And then Hollywood took over.
yeah. So
What do you call that one again?
this is a grotesque.
But it's not made, if it's on Notre Dame, that's older than the
No,
discovery.
because that's 1800s.
There were, let's rephrase. There were some kinds of fantastical creatures
Yeah,
on Notre Dame way back when.
yeah, that's what I thought that
Yeah,
was, so that's why.
Leduc does this, but he's doing it in the 1800s.
Okay,
So he's looking at drawings of or paintings of Notre Dame before all this stuff came off.
When did you
Yeah.
say again they were taken off?
Yeah, before the revolution.
Before the revolution.
So, yeah, so we don't really know. Is he going back to the old medieval imagery
Yeah,
of a
which then
fantastic
it would be
creature?
Well, I
A
mean,
fantastical.
Yes.
the
Right,
grotesques
okay.
didn't stay in Italy.
No, they went all over, but you have a point.
The images didn't
Yeah,
stay
I
in
mean,
Italy,
you know.
they spread.
So we don't know. Is this based
Yeah.
on a grotesque that he looked at, or is this based strictly on what he saw in the
that-
church?
Yeah.
His particular sculpture became very famous because it was illustrated in an etching by a very famous symbolist artist, and it circulated everywhere.
Hmm.
And it's often referred to as a gargoyle because people have lost the sense of the specificity of that term. So if you see this referred to as a gargoyle, that's why.
Yeah.
That's why.
You know, I mean, I don't know how many of you have seen the Disney cartoon of the Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yeah.
He's one of the gargoyles that comes to life.
Yeah, that comes, yeah.
The quote unquote gargoyle.
I was the historical advisor for that movie.
Oh, were you?
Oh,
At
cool.
the beginning, I had to conduct a 3-hour seminar for the Disney artists who had never read the book.
Ah.
And most of them had not yet been to Paris. And it was a steep learning curve.
Really? That's interesting. Yeah. You would think
We
if
should
they
have
are
brought you in and.
caricature drawers, they would have looked at all those kinds of things.
And then I asked for a donation to the LA County Museum of Art for my time. And they sent a house plant.
Wow.
Disney.
Classy Disney.
Doesn't
classy.
surprise me. My husband
Disney
worked
is-
for them. They're very
Disney
cheap.
is notorious for being cheap.
Cheap, yeah.
It's a long story.
Okay. Anything else?
Actually,
Any
I
other
wanted to
questions?
say something about the Green Man.
Oh, yeah.
The Green Man is primarily Northern Europe, does not occur almost never in Italy. It's primarily French, but also German and English. It is not necessarily uniquely associated with men.
No, there's
the
green women,
underside of the tomb of one of the queens of France that has 3 green men, and the underside. The key image for France was probably the baptismal font that was in Saint Denis, and it was so famous that the churches that followed the Church of Saint Denis, which is basically where Gothic style began, must have been influenced by this baptismal font.
Yeah.
Just there's a curator at the Louvre who wrote about the Green Man. So, knowing that you were going to discuss the Green Man, I made sure to refresh my memory by rereading his essay. The Green Men, according to this curator, do not really occur in ancient Roman art.
Hmm.
There might be what we call a pseudomorph, like a coincidental resemblance with the grotesque paintings.
Yeah, I
There's
thought they were
the
pagan.
French, obviously, every language has its own term for the Green Man. Tête à feuille, head with leaves, is a French term. Margaret, thank you. We can discuss that later.
I'm writing it down.
Let's see.
Lambert.
And the tiles in her bedroom, I never made that distinction. That's really good. All I can think is that he got a masculine motif.
And she got a
and
feminine.
Millicent.
Yeah. I just found it interesting that.
Yeah.
But so are green men protectorates then?
Yeah.
Oh, they
Well,
are
They
protectorates.
were at a
Okay.
certain point in
Careful,
history.
be
Whatever you call
careful,
it. They were
because
protecting.
They shouldn't be confused
Yeah.
with the wild man, which
Yeah.
Yeah.
did become transformed into a
Protective, yeah.
Yeah.
image.
Green men
The
are,
origin of the Green Man is still sort of a mystery.
A mystery,
Why
okay.
the baptismal font in Saint Denis looked like the Green Man, looked like what we
But
call
they are,
the Green Man.
they
I
are
don't know.
included in the apotropaic magic
That's fine,
pantheon
but
of,
they
yeah,
weren't necessarily,
intended that way.
there's no documentary proof that explains that
Right,
point.
right.
yeah, just, and,
There's a theory that they reveal, they're an outgrowth of the combination, the medieval mind seeing man, vegetation, and the three elements, for example, as all intermingled, basically. And with all the examples of green men, at least the French curator's done a compendium of them.
Yeah.
It's hard to say, because so many of them occur on churches,
But that's in Europe.
Okay.
There is a, like I said, there's a wall of a building in Iraq that has looks exactly like a green man you'd see in a church in Europe. And it's from the 2nd century BC.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, BCE. And then there's also this other academic who decided actually it comes from India. I had never heard that before.
No.
So I was just trying to give you different academics' views, which basically says to me they still really don't know
Yeah.
where they come from
Yeah.
much more numerous in sculpture than they are
in
manuscripts.
painting. And you see them a lot on English and French and German
And
churches.
if you look on the Scabello, is that how you pronounce it?
Yes, they're beautiful.
Outside the library, when you come out, there's a green man that's on the back.
On the back of the chair.
On the back of that Scabello.
Really?
Yep, got the.
So once you
branches
start
and
looking
leaves.
for
Yeah,
them,
okay.
you will
I'll
see
do that,
them
yeah.
everywhere. I just wanted to say, don't give any kind of
Definitive answer.
and or religious significance to them, because they are
You can say it
essentially a
might be.
decorative element. And in academic circles, they call them folate heads instead of green men.
Which is close to the French.
Yeah.
Close to the
Are
French, yeah.
Is the three-headed man, related in any way to the green man, or is
The
that?
three-headed man.
In the floor in Mr. Hurst's bedroom of A house, you've got the green man, you got the three-headed man.
Oh, yeah.
And you've got the, I don't know, what is the chimera or
Yeah,
whatever they
that
call him,
creature.
guy, the creature guy.
Chimera, yeah.
And I always think of these as power symbols, cause I know I read that somewhere, and that three heads are more powerful than one.
I beg to differ.
So.
That sounds like an alpha male.
Well, that he was an alpha male, so she's designing a room for an alpha male, right? He's got Napoleon.
I don't think
Now,
it's
see,
today's
there's where you
version of
guys
that.
go. What I used to say is A equals B equals C does not mean A equals Z. You gotta be careful. That
I don't
is
know. I didn't see
projecting
anything about three-headed man.
how you feel about Hearst with what stuff looks like at the castle.
Yeah, I
I
didn't
would
see
say
anything.
don't go there.
But he's got
It
Melisande too,
depends on
the
how
twin-tailed
the heads are
mermaid.
configured.
On her mantle.
And those
It
were
could
designed by the
represent
craftsmen who
3
created
inches
those
of
windows.
man.
Well,
That wasn't
that's a
Julian
French-
Morgan.
That's a French.
Yeah, well, that wasn't
Yeah.
Julian Morgan or Hearst. That was the guy who designed those window frames.
Well, one of them
It's
is
a mantle.
real, right?
So before
The
this
one in the center.
breaks down into sub-talk, I just want to say again, thank you to Monica.
Yes.
For the presentation. And then just a couple of announcements. Because of the holiday season, our tours, we